¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo están amigos y amigas de Futuro, la radio del rock, desde acá, desde las plataformas digitales, para conectarnos con el mundo, como siempre, y tomar contacto en esta ocasión con la ciudad de Nueva York, en New York City, porque ahí se encuentra un amigo nuestro, a quien nos vamos a conocer y se lo vamos a presentar a todo el mundo, el señor Michael Lindsay-Hogg. Hoy día muy venido a las noticias porque él fue el gran director del documental y la película Let It Be de The Beatles. Michael, welcome to Radio Futuro. Welcome to the Chilean audience.
Oh, Raniero, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to talking to you for a while, and I'm so glad we could arrange it.
Yeah, we're expecting this conversation for a lot of time, but finally we're here.
Finally.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. And how are you? How are you? How does it
I'm good. I'm good. It's unlike the weather with you there in the winter. We're having summer, and it's 95 degrees, and it's like being in a heat, like being in a heat dome. Otherwise, we're good. Thank you.
And I think I suppose a lot of requests from medias from the whole world after the Get Back success and Let It Be issues.
Yeah, especially certainly after Peter Jackson's wonderful Get Back, but then to do with Let It Be, it's been hidden for 50 years, and so. The re-release of the restored Let It Be has been a really big occasion. It's streaming on Disney Plus. It's had very good reviews from the press, which is good because when it was released in 1970, it was very misunderstood as a movie because it was completely tied in with the Beatles breakup. And everybody thought it was the breakup movie and that it had been shot very recently. In fact, it was finished 5 months before the Beatles broke up, but no one knew that. And so it had a very bad reception. Unlike now, with so many magazines and websites saying, oh, this is great, we're having so much fun, this is a wonderful movie. So for me, it's been worth waiting 50 years. But it's been a long time for my revenge,
Yeah, it's a good revenge because I think the Get Back movie from Peter Jackson made a kind of justice for the original film. And put on the right way their meaning. And let me ask you about the spirit of the recording, all the hours you made in the Twickenham and Apple studios. If you made some memories, you think the Beatles really they were in his final stage? You feel that feeling that this band is almost broken or not?
Well, that's a very good question. Not quite. What I did feel, sorry, I've had a cold. What I did feel was that the Beatles burst on to the world in 1963 or 1964 when they were 22, 23, and John Lennon and Ringo were 24. They were very young, and they took over the world, musically, socially, to do with the way they looked, to do with their spirit, everything about them. When we meet them in 1969, when we shot the footage that Peter used in Get Back and I used in Let It Be, they're different people. They'd stopped touring in 1966, so they didn't have the connection with an audience that they were used to having. See, because they'd grown up playing in bars and clubs and then stadiums, but it was always with an audience. Also, they were getting older. They weren't 22, 23. A couple of them were aiming toward 30. And because they weren't on the road so much, they weren't connected physically the way they had been. They were all living very separately. Three of them were living in the country. Paul was living more in London, but they were all kind of working separately. And so there wasn't the songwriting collaboration which there had been when they were younger. Plus, they all were looking for what was next for them individually. George Harrison knew he was a songwriter, but couldn't get Paul McCartney and John Lennon to pay attention to his songs. John was in a relationship with Yoko Ono, which was pushing his work in a more avant-garde way. Paul was writing for himself great songs, and Ringo was part of all the group, but they weren't like they were when they were kids, and so they were thinking, what will we do now? And so when we see them in Get Back and in Let It Be, that's where we meet them. So I didn't think, to finish off the answer to your question, I didn't think they were gonna break up. I thought that they might each one of them do a separate project. But even when we were on the roof, them especially on the roof, when they are so thrilled to play together again, and it's such a up occasion, I didn't think they were going to break up. But then things happened, and we can talk about that later. But so when we meet them in 1969, they're different than they were. They're each sort of pursuing his own path, and that's what's going on when they start working on their songs.
Yeah, and what happened with your memories too? When you I think you have the choice to see all the footage before the release of Get Back, and when you see yourself younger than now and being directly witness of the Beatles playing in the rooftop. What about this kind of memories? I mean, wow.
Well,
I was there.
Well, yeah. As you know, the first idea for Let It Be was going to be a concert film. We'd done the video together for Hey Jude. And as part of the video for Hey Jude, we had an audience, we had a crowd of a couple of hundred people to join in the chorus, because we couldn't just have the Beatles for the 4-minute chorus. We needed something else. And we had to reload the videotapes every so often. And then the Beatles found themselves, because this would take about 10 minutes or 12 minutes to reload the tape, the Beatles found themselves playing to the small crowd who was there for the Hey Jude video. They hadn't played to any audience since 1966. This was 68. And the crowd loved it. I mean, to be one of 200 people with the Beatles playing to you, they'd sing Hey Jude, then they play for 10 minutes, then do Hey Jude. So everybody had a good time. And so I got a call from Paul McCartney asking to come and talk to him and John Lennon. And they said, well, because they'd had a good time with the Hey Jude crowd video, they thought maybe one more time, maybe they could do a concert like in the old days. And did I want to do it with them? Because we had already had a relationship, because I did Hey Jude, I did Revolution as videos. And in 1966,
you made Rain and Paperback Record. Yeah.
So we knew each other already at that point, up to a little bit. And then, as after about 10 days of being in Twickenham and figuring out where we would maybe do the concert, I was advocating. One of them thought, well, why don't we just go back to the Cavern? Because that's where we started, and we do a concert there. And I said, well, things have changed since you were at the Cavern, and the world has changed because you've changed it. And I thought we needed a bigger venue, a bigger location for their concert. And so I had this idea of doing it in the amphitheater on the coast of Libya. And that almost got done, but it didn't. And then George, because he was going through a period of, and I liked him very much. He was a very interesting, affable, curious man, but he was frustrated because he could not get the attention he felt he was due for his own songs. So then he says, I'm going to go home for a week. And so everything ground to a halt. And then he said, well, I'll come back, but I want to leave Twickenham because it's not acoustically a good place for us. And we'll go to our studio in Savile Row in London, and we'll work, and we won't have any more concert. We'll just work on the album.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, I'm not doing a concert movie anymore. I'm doing a documentary, but it's a documentary about the Beatles.
Yeah.
And I had a sort of responsibility about that because no one had ever really filmed the Beatles rehearsing before. No one knew how they did it. But then I'm also thinking, what's going to make a good movie? Because you didn't want them to be doing, rehearsing that song again and again and again, because it needed a conclusion. It needed somewhere to, for that episode in their lives to finish. So I had this idea of they wouldn't do it in Libya. We weren't going to do it at the Cavern. We weren't going to do it in the field. So I said to them one day at lunch, why did we just do it on the roof? And then McCartney says, do what on the roof? And I said, the concert. And so that's what we did. And
it was your idea.
Yeah, because they were all interested in their music, naturally. My job was to be interested in the movie and to represent them as best I thought I could, because I loved them. They were great. I mean, I don't mean they were easy, but they were extraordinary four men. I mean, extraordinary musicians, extraordinarily, each one of them funny, intelligent, difficult, amusing, everything like that. But I thought that somehow the documentary had to end with a performance, and I got them to agree to come up on the roof only about half an hour before we went on the roof. And I had 11 cameras. I was ready to go. They weren't sure they were going to do it. They, yes, no, maybe. And then we were in a little room right beneath the roof, right beneath the wooden staircase, which leads up to the roof. And George did not want to do it particularly. Ringo said it's very cold up there, which it was 42 degrees, probably like you in Chile now. And Paul very much said, we have to do it because if we don't connect with an audience again, who are we? That was his thinking. And then there was a silence. And then John Lennon, out of the silence, said, fuck it, let's do it. And then we went up on the roof. And what I love every time I see the roof in Let It Be or in Get Back is how thrilled they were to be playing together again. How whatever tensions there were before to do with the music and stuff, and who was doing what, they just loved playing. They were the greatest rock and roll. Rolling Stones, Beatles, pretty good. And so the four of them up on the roof had such a good time, and you can see it in their faces and in their eyes and the way they interact with each other.
Mm.
And so when we came off the roof, we were on such a high, and they were thrilled with how the roof had gone. They were happy. And when you look at the roof, you know that's what happened. And then to finish this little bit of what I'm saying to you is then at the very end, when we're about to leave the roof, John Lennon says, and I hope we passed the audition. And if anybody ever passed the audition, it was the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was my experience with Let It Be.
Yeah, and you experienced on the rooftop, and when the bands came down to the stairs to the studios, you been take off the cameras on the roof.
Say that again, Renero.
You stay on the roof when the Beatles came back to the studios.
No, what happened was the police came.
Yeah.
The police came, and that was good in a way. We were sort of expecting that it might come, because the Beatles building in Savile Row in London was in a very conservative area.
Yeah.
Mainly for very high-end, fashionable men's clothing stores, where you'd get a suit made for $3,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
And you'll notice in Let It Be, there's a couple of men in the next door building which sold expensive fabric, very much looking like older people, bowler hat. Well, you buy this, music is blah, blah, blah. And there was a tension between the younger people and the older people. The younger people, I often think, you see, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were both children of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And their parents, uncles and aunts and mothers and fathers, had been through a very different childhood than they were having. The parents had grown up in the Depression, then they'd gone into the war. And so they were quite conservative, that generation. And then when the rock and roll people came along, they wanted to break out of that conservative attitude and be able to have longer hair and be able to have rock and roll music. And the other thing which happened, I mean, you'll know about, but you're too young, you weren't there, is the birth control pill came in 1961. And so that took a lot of pressure off sexual connection between young people, because the fear of pregnancy was not as worrying. And so you had the birth control pill, you had long hair, and you had rock and roll music. And that didn't go down well with, I mean, you couldn't get a job. I mean, if my hair was not that long, it wasn't like the Beatles. But if you had even semi-long hair, like if you wanted to work in a bank or in a store, you couldn't get a job. You had to cut your hair and look normal. Anyway, so I thought the police might come. There might be noise complaints. And they did come. And you'll notice in the Let It Be movie and in Peter's one that expecting the police maybe to come, I built a little shed in the lobby with a two-way mirror. So they didn't know they were being photographed. But because I expected them to be in the foyer, I had the camera. So I thought that was smart. And so then they come up on the roof. Now when they came up on the roof, in one way it was good because that's only as many songs as the Beatles had rehearsed. They'd only rehearsed 5 or 6 songs, and so the police came at the right time. They were going to arrest us, and of course the Beatles being, for all
Actually,
kinds of freedom.
actually, there was a very critical moment at the police at the roof because Mal Evans turned off one of the amps of the John and George, but Ringo and Paul they're still playing. They're non-stop.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's critical that you notice that, because Ringo and Paul kept playing, and then Mal turned off George's amp, and then George, thinking, I'm going to turn it on again. And that's what he does. He goes and turns the amp on again. So the Beatles were striking a blow for freedom, and the police were striking the blow for law and order and complaints. But everybody, the police being on the roof, once it got resolved and the Beatles finished, and they had no more songs to play anyway, and the Beatles went down, and the Beatles give a cheer. And John Lennon says, "I hope we pass the audition." We all went down to the down to the basement where the studio was, with 1 or 2 cameras. The other cameras where the guys had to de-rig them. The roof was finished, so they then had to de-rig the cameras and the lights and all the equipment and blah, blah, blah. And then the guys in the streets the same. But when we were down in the sound studio, they were high. They just said this had been wonderful, and it was, and that's why every time I see Let It Be, and wonder, what the problem was when it came out 50 years previously. Well, the problem was the audience thought it was the divorce movie, that these people who had carried the audience from 1963 or 64 and changed the world weren't going to be together anymore. But it wasn't to do with Let It Be. Let It Be was finished as a movie 4 or 5 months before the Beatles ever broke up. And then, then what happened was, this is just to finish the story of Let It Be. It had a release in America, and it was only ever meant to be 80 or 90 minutes long. It was a theatrical movie with music for a regular theatrical audience. Then, when it had completed its time in the theaters, it was shown on TV a couple of times, and then it went to VHS. VHS was that early kind of cassette recording.
Yeah.
And then there was a legal problem about who owned the music rights. I mean, there's always problems with music rights. Who owned the music rights for the VHS? Was it Apple Company? Was it EMI? Was it who? And so they pulled the VHS to figure this out. And then when they could have re-released the VHS, there was no appetite amongst the 4 Beatles to do it, because they weren't the Beatles anymore. They were just John and Paul and George and Ringo, and they all had separate careers. And so they didn't want to be Beatles anymore because they weren't Beatles anymore. And so then it was put away. And it was only, and I kept fighting for years. And Paul kept saying, yeah, it will come out. We have to deal with some things first, whatever. And he was in favor of it. And you see, this went on for 50 years. I mean, we were all under 30 when we finished shooting it, and I'm 84 now. It came out finally, but who helped enormously was Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
And right from the time we met, Peter had seen Let It Be and said, when I finish mine, I said, what is your movie going to be about anyway, with all the footage? And he said, my movie is going to be a documentary about the making of a documentary. And he said, but I've seen Let It Be recently, and it has to be the other movie. I mean, my movie, when I'm finished with it, and Let It Be, those are the two Beatle movies. And my movie will be longer because I have more time. And yours is, he said, I love your movie. It has to come out. So he was, once Get Back had done well, and once um, Paul and Ringo and Sean Lennon and Danny Harrison and Olivia Harrison had the experience working it through with Peter in New Zealand, he was able to influence them into Let It Be come out again, and that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. And you feel the final cut of
Get Back.
Get Back film is kept the spirit of your footage, because you recorded that all the footage. You spend hours and hours and hours and a month with the band, and the Peter Jackson movie is 8 and 9 hours of a kind of resume. But when you watch the film, the spirit is the same. He can kept that spirit.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, I thought Peter did a wonderful job with it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the differences, as you will have noticed, is that he's able to go into George Harrison leaving for a week or so.
Yeah.
And then he's able to then have us all sitting around chatting. And he's able to use, I think, I know it's my voice. I'm talking to John saying, do you think this little pause, whatever, is going to make it easier for you and Paul to start working together again? And John said, I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
Because they weren't working together anymore. They were working separately. So Peter was able to go into it more. And one of the reasons I didn't do it in the original, well, I had two reasons. One is I didn't have George saying, I'm going to leave the group. What had happened was I knew there was a little tension. We all used to have lunch every day in the little restaurant, Commissary.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew there was tension. And I thought, if George is going to, quit for a week or so, today will be the day. So I bugged the flower pot. I put a little microphone in the flower.
Yeah.
And he did come up and say, see you around the clubs, meaning I'll see you in, the nightclub or the restaurant, but I'm finished. So then he left. So then everybody talked. And when I played back the recording that afternoon, all I could get was other sounds, knives and forks on plates, people laughing in the background. I couldn't get the voices. What Peter was able to do many years later, because he's a whiz at technical stuff, he really is like an inventor.
Mm.
And he then sent me a little clip saying, this is going to knock your socks off. He sent me a little bit of my recording, which you couldn't hear anything. And then he sent his recording, which is what he uses in the movie, in that wonderful sequence when McCartney and Lennon are talking, and all Peter shoots is a tablecloth with a vase of flowers on it. That's what the technology in 50 years was able to do. Mm. And he was able to take enormous advantage of the improvement in technology. Also, the Beatles never interfered in the cut. They'd come and look at it. They say, oh, that's okay, it's okay. But the producer of the movie, Neil Aspinall, who'd been there, used to drive the van, mm-hmm. getting them to gigs, at the beginning. He said, look, because I put in a bit about George leaving and a bit of us sitting talking about everything. And he said, look, the movie started with 4 Beatles. And there are 4 Beatles again in the movie, and it's going to finish with 4 Beatles. So do we need George leaving? And I realized what he was saying politically was that the Beatles wanted to be seen to be the Beatles.
Yeah.
Because there was no thought at this point, which would be probably June or July 1969, that they would break up, because we finished shooting in January 69, started editing. Well, it took a long time because we had to sync all the rushes, everything like that. And so Neil said, look, the four to start with, four to finish with, let's just leave that bit out. And I thought, well, okay, I can see that. But Peter had the material also. And so that was very interesting. The whole George thing is interesting. I didn't have it in Let It Be for a variety of reasons. And at the time, when it came out in 1970, well, if they hadn't broken up, but Peter was looking at an entirely different map than I was.
Yeah.
I was looking at the map, like we look at the map now, and so many, there are places which have different names now as countries, and it used to be called Yugoslavia, for example, 70 years ago, and is now called Bosnia, Serbia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Peter was looking at a different map than I was. And so that's sort of the story of Let It Be, and how it relates to Get Back. But Peter was instrumental in letting Let It Be come out again.
Did you have the chance to talk with Paul McCartney in the last year after Get Back and Let It Be restored?
No, I haven't. No. I haven't talked to Paul about it. He was going to. I don't know if he's seen it yet. I know Ringo had. I don't think Ringo had seen it for 50 years. And for whatever reason, his memory may have got confused about what happened after the movie was finished. And he thought, oh, God, that was so depressing what went on. I now understand. He says he likes it. He says what he calls the new cut. Well, there is no new cut. Let It Be is cut for cut, image for image, the same as it was in 1970. But if he wants to call it a new cut and say he likes it, that's fine by me. And Paul, I don't know if Paul has seen it yet. I'm waiting for him to see it. And he was going to go in London, but then something happened. And listen, he can see it at home on his TV if he wants, but I haven't heard from him, which is interesting only because he was for a long time an ally in it coming out again. Because don't forget, after the Beatles broke up, then I did videos for Wings, and we got on. I mean, and I was very fond of his first wife, Linda, who died. And, I'd sometimes go and have tea with them and, play with Mary and Stella in the garden or stuff like that. But then his life changed. He married, when Linda died, he married again, and then he divorced, and then he married Nancy, who he's with now. So I haven't been as close to him as I was, but, life changes, I'm 84, he's 81 or something like that. And, we've changed in the last, I first met him when I was 26 and he was 24, that was years ago. But I will, he will see it, and I think he'll like it. I mean, everybody does like it, because in a funny way, there's nothing, and here's something interesting, I think. The scene when Paul and George are talking in the first 20 minutes of Let It Be, and Paul is saying, "I'm not trying to get at you, but," and then George says, "I'll play what you want, or I won't play at all." And people, when that first came out, took it as oh my God, the Beatles are fighting. They never, when they saw, as I was working on it, they never said, take that out. They never said, that's going to look bad for us. It's going to look like we're fighting. Because they saw that as a completely normal exchange between two musicians who aren't quite agreeing on what to play. But it would be the same as actors in the theater, uh,
Hmm.
actors in rehearsing a scene in a movie. It would be, no, why are you saying the line like that? You really should be saying, no, I want to say it like that. It was nothing more than that. But because people had never seen them in any kind of tension, they thought it meant much more than it did. So that's something that, so they never asked that to come out. And they wanted people to, this is when they were the Beatles. They wanted people to end up liking the Beatles, which they did, on the roof. I mean, but I fought for years and years, as in as many ways as I could, to get Let It Be out again, because it was very frustrating for me, because I knew it was a good movie. I mean, I knew it had value as a movie. But then what happened is, when the VHS came along, then they weren't shown anymore. A lot of bootlegs were made from the VHSs.
Yeah.
So what people were getting were bad quality, dark, bad sound, scratchy versions of Let It Be. And so obviously, if they're seeing it, they're saying, oh my God, this is so depressing, this movie is so boring, is whatever. And so part of the battle was just to get Let It Be out again and seen as it should be seen. Because Peter did restoration work on the negative over there in New Zealand for his own Get Back. And he has got, again, like I was saying earlier, wonderful technology. And then we talked about the difference between his Get Back and my Let It Be. And his Get Back is very clean looking.
Hmm.
And then the director of photography and I said to him, let's see if we can get a little more grain, not a lot, but just a little more grain in the Let It Be, to remind people it was shot as a movie,
Yeah.
So, but listen, I've done a lot of other stuff in those 50 years, but it's a weird experience. I mean, 50 years later, it comes out again. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time.
Finally, Michael, I would like to make a tribute to you, because you not only made the Let It Be film. Actually, in the films, we can see a kind of joke from John Lennon talking about this rock and roll circus by Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And now the host, the Rolling Stone, is
Well, what happened?
a very fun joke.
Yeah. But what had happened was the shooting, when we were doing the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, it got later and later and later, and the Rolling Stones didn't get on stage till 2 a.m. And I realized, as I was editing it, which was at the same time as I was doing Let It Be, I didn't have an introduction for the Rolling Stones. So when on the Let It Be set one day, I went to John, because he'd been in the Rock and Roll Circus, and said, would you introduce the Rolling Stones? And he said, what'll I say? And I said, I don't know, you're John Lennon, figure it out. And then that's when he did. And now the Rolling Stones. I mean, it's a beautiful introduction. And you got it exactly. It was very good.
And what was that kind of experience to make that kind of show? This experience, a weird experience, that rock and roll circus with Rolling Stone, Jethro Tull, The Who, and many others, Eric Clapton.
Yep. Well, The Who. Listen. If you want to do this again, I'll tell you the story of the Rock and Roll Circus. But I think I've talked enough for your audience today. But I can, another day. The Rolling Stones was held up for 28 years.
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you that another time.
All right. All right. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time and for your generosity to share your knowledge with us. and your time. And as we said in the first email we exchanged, you are invited to come to Chile and to talk with more people.
I'd love to. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while because your emails were so intelligent and so generous. And it's just a variety of things, but I'm so glad we got to do it today. And if you want to do it again in the future about anything, just get in touch.
Thank you very much, and we will do it. We will do it again. Maybe we talk about Two of Us film, a nice film. This chapter within Lennon and McCartney and the Dakota.
Yeah,
nice film. And Rolling Stone Circus, rock and roll, and all your stuff you made after Beatles too.
Okay, so listen, good to meet you on Zoom, and I hope your audience enjoys this. And I'd love to come to Chile when it's warmer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, maybe October, November, December.
Okay. All right.
Finally, I will ask you to say hello to the audience to Radio Futuro in Chile.
Hola, the audience to Radio Futuro in Chile. I hope you're muy bien.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much. Michael Lindsay-Hogg con nosotros, una conversación entretenidísima de la que sacaremos muchas conclusiones y ya estaremos nuevamente conectados en las plataformas de Futuro, la radio del rock. Que estén bien, sigan ahí, nosotros nos reencontramos en otra instancia. Chao. Chao.